The storm arrives like a hand slamming a door. Rain hammers the glass of the Ashcroft Tower so hard that the reflections blur, turning a row of corporate faces into smeared paint. Wind rips at the banners that hang from the facade, and somewhere above the city, a transformer gives a long metallic shriek before everything goes black. Inside the boardroom, light dies mid-sentence. Alexandra Ashcroft's voice cuts off at the edge of a word. One heartbeat of stunned silence. Then a scattered murmur. Lamps flicking, phones lighting like fireflies. Then the panic that follows when a room full of decision-makers realizes they cannot see and cannot control what they cannot see. Bernard Kellerman is where he's always been, on the periphery. He has his bucket and mop parked against a glass wall, his jacket folded over the handle. It's after midnight. The boardroom is one of the last places to be cleaned. He knows the pattern of the building, how the HVAC hums when the storm hits, which elevators stall if they lose power. He knows the light switches and the emergency exits in ways most of the people in the room never have to. He knows that the storm will complicate everything. He knows to stay calm. Then he hears the soft, thudding crack of someone collapsing. Alexandra's head drops forward like something snapped. The chair tips. Glass slides against oak. For a full second, the room is a collection of shapes in the cold glow of phone screens. Then Bernard's hands are on the rail. He's moving through the low light with the certainty of someone whose work keeps him close to risk and repair. He crouches beside her before anyone else has formed the word. He checks for pulse. Nothing steady at first, just the wild, skipping motion his thumb finds and steadies. He calls out for help. He positions a phone flashlight above her head and leans down. His breath is steady, practiced. He places his mouth and then his hands where they need to be. On the phone, the circle of light reveals the sheen of rain on the meeting table, the smudge of lipstick, the thin strands of someone's neatly styled hair. It reveals, too, what it always reveals when light is suddenly forced into darkness: the reality of muscle and breath. 2 breaths, he says aloud, to no one in particular, as he begins rescue breaths and compressions. He's learned the sequence in class years ago, the same training they gave the building staff. Check responsiveness, call for EMS, open airway, give 2 rescue breaths, begin compressions. His palms press the sternum in a steady rhythm against the expensive fabric of a grown woman's blouse and the bones beneath. He counts silently, like someone counting the small mercies of each minute. There's a sound in the room that cuts the storm down to size. Sharp, insistent. The instructor's voice from a classroom years ago. The voice of a small girl in a neighbor's house telling him to be careful as he fixed a heater. He breathes. He feels a tiny, hard lift under his hands. Then, after compressions, the cough, something wet and useless at first, then a ragged inhalation that turns toward life. Someone has pressed a phone to record. Maybe it's automatic, security cameras blinking with their infrared eyes. Maybe it's a hand trembling on a screen. The video catches the angle. 1,000 viewers will later freeze and replay. Bernard's face near hers, his lips close in the dim light, the halo of a phone flashlight above. In a single, still fraction, the image strips context and leaves only suggestion. By the time the paramedics arrive, a room full of people are talking fast and low and tidy, turning their fear into decisions. A woman who knows the building's emergency protocol gives the paramedics the information they need. A junior executive speaks into a smartwatch about liability. A security officer takes the footage because that is what security officers do. Bernard is sticky with rain, with the sweat of exertion. He smells like old coffee and cleaning fluid and the salt of the storm. He's the one who walked out of the darkness with what he knows to do. Alexandra's eyes open under the harsh ambulance lights. Her breath is uneven but present. A few paramedics murmur about orthostatic hypotension, a reaction to stress and exhaustion exacerbated by a sudden fall in blood pressure. They praise Bernard in clipped, utilitarian way. Your quick action probably saved her life.
But the room is full of people who have a different economy: optics. Someone in a crisp suit is already thinking about the next shareholder call, the next press statement. He's the sort who measures risk in brand damage and market response. He doesn't see the pair of hands that kept breath in a body. He sees a photograph that will tell a tidier story. He sees the potential to harness the image to a digestible headline that places liability and comfort in equal parts. "Get him out of the building," someone says. It's quiet, behind the clatter of the crew, but it lands like a verdict. "We can't have." The rest of the sentence goes soft, but the meaning is clear. If the company is to be protected, loose edges must be tied. Bernard is taken aside. They call him a hero, and then, within the breath between arrival and exposure online, they call him an embarrassment. Someone in the communications office freezes a frame from a shaky clip and sends it to the feeds. The image spreads with the ravenous speed of stormwater down gutter lines. Clickbait leans into a single, unmoored interpretation. Billionaire CEO kissed by janitor during blackout. Comments bloom like mold. Voices in the thread conflate proximity with permission. They erase the compression and rescue breaths with a careless stillness. Within 24 hours, Bernard receives a terse message: termination. No threats, no long investigation. Just a clean, corporate-scented email citing inappropriate conduct and violation of company policy. The policy reads like a net slung after the fact, meticulous and unforgiving. Tyler Brigham, the CFO with the white hairline and the patient forehead, argues for swift action. "We can't allow an implication like that to anchor," he says to the board with a patience that looks like steel. The word precedent appears more than once. They spin a different truth in press releases. The company regrets the incident, offers thoughts and a review of protocols, and promises to cooperate with any inquiry. Their lawyers prepare statements. A PR executive posts the frame with a caption that suggests impropriety. It snowballs into a narrative the board finds easier to manage than the messy, true one. Bernard's name is spoken in the same sentence as the word policy breach. For Bernard, the firing is a violence that arrives in quiet. He reads the message on the night bus, the lights on the city outside streaking through the rain-streaked window like lenient accusations. He thinks of Molly, asleep at home with a notebook of broken crayons by her pillow and the glow of a cheap nightlight. She's 8, mouth a permanent question. She has never known a steady paycheck. Bernard has managed things by doing the honest, invisible work that allows other people's lives to run smoothly. He packs his mop bucket in a faded plastic bag. At the building's loading dock, a supervisor, someone who felt bad but was also nervous, says, softly, "People are saying you leaned too far." Bernard wants to say, "But she was unconscious." He wants to say, "She coughed." He wants to say, "It was a rescue." Those phrases sit in his mouth like a coin in the teeth. Words have weight. They can buy very little when rent is due. On the bus, his phone buzzes with messages from neighbors who have seen the headline. Some are short and sharp, "What were you doing?" while others are small rituals of support. A hand-to-hand cash transfer through an app, a message from Janet Holloway offering soup. Janet is the kind of neighbor who keeps her curtains open and knows the names of the people on her block because she has a habit of naming what matters. She stands at the door when Bernard returns home with the mop bag, snatches his arm as if it's both consolation and accusation at once. "You did what you had to," she says. She holds the keys to one of those city apartments that smell of lemon cleaner and the humidity of a building that's kept together more by care than money. Her voice is blunt because she has no patience for gossip that burns down the small. Molly wakes and tries to understand. She has seen the pictures. She has watched a chorus of strangers decide her father's character with the click of a button. When Bernard sits her down, she bends her head to his knee, small and trembly, like someone hoping he is a rock. They lose the flat 3 months later. The landlord has his own pressures. He is a man who lives off margins, and the smear's economic consequence trickles down to him like a leak. "You can't be late on a check," he says, with a very human, very small cruelty. Eviction notices are legal, sterile, stamped with a municipal certainty that does not account for the way dignity frays when your name becomes a rumor. Bernard takes temp jobs when someone will hire him. He fixes an old grocery store's floor at midnight, then a bakery's ovens at dawn. He sweeps a church basement for donations and spends the afternoon on an outreach van. He does the work that keeps other people's routines from collapsing while his own collapses inward. Money comes in sporadic, like the trickle from a faucet that's been reluctantly repaired. There are days when he does not leave the apartment. He sits at the small kitchen table and stares at the rent notice he cannot afford. Molly colors to keep her anxiety small. She draws a skyline of tall buildings with ladders and people climbing them. In her sketch, Bernard draws himself at the bottom with huge hands, like a guardian. She puts a star above his head. The town's rumor mill is part of the city's weather now. It sits under the thunder. Local anchors run the clip again and again, dissecting the angle, speculating. Online, people who never met Bernard decide he's a predator or a hero. The comments that say he saved a life are drowned out by louder accusations spun from a single, uncontextualized frame. The public forgives and condemns with the same breathless certainty the storm imposes on everything, life or death, black or white, with nothing to hold the gray. Alexandra wakes at 3 in the morning with her throat full of smoke, the residue of a dream she's having. She sees the boardroom, a sea of faces, a light extinguished, and a pair of hands over a mouth. The dream feels like a raw, looped footage, that single still frame blown up until the pixels are a crowd of mouths. She sits up, heart loud against the hush of her penthouse, and the rain on the windows sounds like the city weeping. On the hardwood floors of her suite, on the carpet bought for silence, she cannot cast off the image. She brushes teeth until the taste of disinfectant and toothpaste supplant the metallic tang of adrenaline in her mouth. She scrolls through the overnight coverage, the same clip replayed until it loses any context beyond a thumbnail. Tyler calls with a clipped update about market reaction. He keeps his voice measured the way you keep a houseplant alive when you want it to survive long enough to decorate. "We've contained it online," he says. "Shareholders are nervous." Something in the word contained unsettles her. She remembers a hand, work-roughened and sure, placed on her sternum. She remembers the taste of salt on the air as the storm filled the room. In the memory, there is no impropriety, only the precise, mechanical care of someone whose hands know what to do when life is thin. But the world she built is one that runs on perception. A single frame and a trending tag can rearrange a life. She watches the grainy clip again. The angle is unforgiving. The phone's light casts bright highlights and deep shadows. The advertisement on the wall for a new Ashcroft initiative becomes an accidental witness. The freeze frame magnifies the moment just before the compressions, the place where intent is invisible and the eye is waiting to invent it. In the comments, someone writes, "If she didn't say stop, it's not assault." And someone else writes, "Class says everything." The pile-on feels brittle in its arithmetic. Guilt is a stubborn thing. It starts below her sternum and rises until her chest feels full. She dreams of the man falling into a stairwell, of a little girl who draws ladders, of a landlord's stamp. In the dream, she does not know how to repay what she feels belongs to her. Apology seems too thin. Money feels transactional. She thinks of writing a long statement, and then thinks of the way statements evaporate like breath on cold glass. She calls for the clip from security. Official channels now, not the red raw feeds of social. The footage lands with the same sound as rain, steady, irreversible. She studies the angle until her eyes ache. There are frames the public does not have. A point of view from the corner that shows the paramedics' wheels, the way Bernard's shoulders work under compression, the chaotic conversation that followed. Her legal counsel cautions restraint, and her PR head coaches the necessary shape of denial. Tyler suggests distance and decorum. The corporate culture, its protocols, its hierarchies, its reflexes, presses her to choose the safe path. But the safe path grates like a hand rubbing glass. In the quiet of the penthouse, Alexandra allows herself a memory not of the boardroom that night, but of a childhood hospital visit. A nurse with large, gentle hands leaning over a child to check a pulse. She remembers the smell of antiseptic and the way gratitude had been small and absolute. She does not want to be the woman who chooses the convenience of a narrative over the messy truth of a human life. The thought of a man losing everything because of a pixelated frame makes her stomach twist. She calls Janet Holloway's number because Janet knows the neighborhoods Bernard moves through. The woman on the phone is blunt and immediate. "He's been around," Janet says, "but you know, people talk. He's a good man." Janet's voice is a kind of compass in the city. She knows Molly's birthday, where Bernard gets his shirts mended, and the routes of the bodega truck that comes by on Tuesdays. She tells Alexandra where Bernard's usual haunts are: the late-night laundromat, the shelter that sometimes has openings, the squad of the library that keeps its doors open when the rain is most brutal. Alexandra jots addresses like lifelines, each one a breadcrumb trail toward a man who, to this moment, is more rumor than person to most of the city. Back at a table, Bernard opens an envelope and finds a notice from a clinic. It's an offer of services. Mortgage assistance, food stamps, the sort of municipal kindness that is efficient but not generous. He grits his teeth and spends the afternoon standing in lines, carrying Molly's backpack and a file of proof that he was where he had to be. The bureaucracy is patient in its slowness, but ruthless in its requirements. Forms demand signatures like admission. At night, they sleep on an air mattress in Janet's spare room. Molly folds herself small and claims a pillow like a talisman. Janet brings soup and a plastic-wrapped fruit salad and plasters for the small cuts of living. She fastens a humor like a bandage. "Use this time," she tells Bernard. "Don't lose you in other people's stories." Bernard does not lose himself easily. Even when he is exhausted, he gives attention, the way a man tends a garden, careful and frequent. He reads Molly the same story about a spool of thread that becomes a bridge, then a boat, then a kite. She listens and draws ladders that take people to the windows. He watches the headlines that latch on to his name and tries to find his reflection beneath the editorial voices. There are nights when he wonders if people are incapable of holding two truths at once, that he saved a life and that an image might mislead. He wants only one thing. He wants the truth to stand up for him. Tyler Brigham's office is all glass and height. He watches the metrics flick upward, stockholders' agitation, trending numbers, then reaches for the tidy solution that preserves the company's forward motion: a scapegoat, a fired employee, a short and severe statement that frames the incident as an unacceptable breach. He arranges for a quiet leak of a different file, something more salacious in tone than the truth, to press the public's gaze into the story's margins. The leak is sugar that dulls the taste of a more complicated medicine. He sees himself in this, a man in a long-running fight to protect a corporation whose image is an economic engine. When the narrative threatens that engine, he reacts like a mechanic who thinks to cover the exposed wheel. The ethics of the action feel to him like a calculation. He rationalizes: better one man's career than a company's future. Better short-term cruelty than long-term collapse. His moral language is efficiency and prevention. Alexandra watches Tyler move through the chessboard and feels the shiver of complicity. She sees in his motion the way corporations make moral decisions with spreadsheets. She thinks of the man who pressed 2 breaths into a body in the dark and wonders how many of the executives in the boardroom would have that skill or that nerve. She wonders how people can bear to weaponize images without seeing what is sacrificed on the altar of optics. She begins to dream in the day. She finds herself standing in a darkened hallway, and at the end of it, a child with a crayon drawing a ladder that leads nowhere. She wakes with the taste of metal in her mouth. She knows she must decide whether to follow the breadcrumb trail Janet handed her. To be someone who signs a check and walks away is easy. To be someone who wades into a neighborhood she does not frequent is different. She has been raised to believe that power can be managed from an office. The storm has taught her that power can be called to account by small hands and quiet courage. Meanwhile, the smear grows because it can. The image is everywhere. A freeze frame exploited to a ferocious economy. A late-night host jokes about the class divide like it's a surface to skim. Anonymous commenters draw castles around themselves and hurl stones. A conservative blogger writes an op-ed about entitlements and boundaries. The algorithm, impervious to nuance, feeds outrage the sugar it craves. Bernard reads the words and feels them like weather, outside and always threatening to come in. He answers one interview request not because he wants the attention, but because the man on the other end of the line has a small voice and asks a question that lands like an offer. "What did you do?" the interviewer asks. Bernard chooses his words with the same care he used to keep a life breathing. He says simply, "I did what anyone would do." The sentence is honest and reductive at the same time. It is not enough for markets, it is enough for his daughter. Alexandra's search begins with a list. She has to rely on people like Janet and the security team, people whose maps are not the same as her own. She makes a decision that surprises even her. She will not write a check and retreat. She will find the man in the frame and ask the truth from the person whose face is blurred by a still. The first lead is small, a name in a payroll sheet the security clerk pulls from an old terminal. Bernard James Kellerman, Building Services, third shift. The clerk remembers the man as competent and quiet. He always had a spare glove, the clerk says. He used to talk to the plants when he watered them. It sounds trivial, and it matters. Plants care less for politics and more for hands that know the tender rhythms. Alexandra arranges for her car. It is a private, efficient thing that slides through wet streets with a quiet that feels abnormal after a storm. She leaves an empty executive suite behind. The glowing screens, the curated art, the staff who will hold the story while she steps into the rain. She forgets her umbrella half the way to the car and drives with the window cracked, letting the city smell of wet concrete and exhaust and something sharper. Hope, maybe, or the clean scent of a life that has not yet been calculated by spreadsheets. She arrives at the block where Bernard has been sleeping with an unbidden anxiety. The buildings are older there, their facades freckled and familiar. A laundromat hums with dryers, their heat a visible pulse. Janet meets her on the sidewalk with a heap of practicalities, an address, a sketch of a route Bernard often takes when the city is kind to him. Janet's face is a map of the neighborhood's care. She is ready to be useful in the way that only people who have lived hard can be. "They'll tell you he keeps to himself," Janet says, "but he's proud. You stand wrong in his world, you'll find he's stubborn in the right way." Alexandra nods. She wonders, briefly and oddly, how it will feel to stand in front of the man who saved her and to ask forgiveness for a world that turned him into a target. She rehearses what to say, then she decides not to rehearse at all. Prepared statements collapse in the face of small rooms and the truth of a single child drawing ladders. Across the city, Bernard stands in line at a municipal center with a temperature that hums like a subdued warning. He clutches a folder of paperwork. Molly sits on his lap, her small legs wrapping around him like a promise. He feels heavy with fatigue and lighter with a strange budding hope that someone, somewhere, might listen. The city is still wet. Puddles reflect street lamp halos like small moons. A bus passes, and the advertisement on its side is for financial products that promise freedom and the leisure to make mistakes. Bernard thinks of all the promises that never reached his neighborhood, all the benevolent plans that ended at a zip code line. He thinks of revenge in the accidental sense, that is, the way the world revenges itself by letting injustices calcify into quiet, sustained losses for the people who can least absorb them. At a diner, Tyler coordinates the company's next steps, leaning on metrics and legalese. He has already placed a quiet call to a tabloid to feed the hunger for scandal, and the tabloid obliges. Tyler watches the small, economical machine of a smear photo do what it is built to do. He lights a cigarette with hands that look practiced at holding difficult things. He tells himself the company's survival is a moral cause. He does not see, or prefers not to see, the human expense of his calculus. Alexandra steps up to a building door, the rain like a drumming on the other side of the glass. She does not have more than an afternoon planned. She has not announced her arrival. She carries no legal team, no camera crew, only an old driver's instinct and a stubborn sense of responsibility. She rings a bell at an address Janet provided. No one answers at first. A man at a third-floor window watches with a curious, cautious interest. Then a child's high voice calls out from inside. "Hold on, there's someone at the door." The small voice is provisional, a window cracked open to a conversation that will make its own rules. Alexandra waits. She smells a roast disappearing in the distance, the scent of everyday life. She thinks of the boardroom, of the lights, of the way the city arranges power and leaves the lives beneath it exposed to weather.
She thinks of Bernard's hands and of how one small set of actions becomes a ruin when a narrative gets into the hands of the wrong people. Inside, Bernard hears the knock. He opens a second to see a woman in a coat, hair wet from the storm, looking distinctly out of place on his stare. She looks at him with a kind of disarming directness that is almost more dangerous than any PR strategy. She is clearly not coming to fix a problem with a corporate check. She has come because she could not keep the image in her head and breathe as if nothing happened. Their eyes meet. Bernard recognizes the face from 100 mentions, from the billboard at the crossroads, from a name the city repeats like a litany. Alexandra recognizes him not as a rumor, but as a person she might have known had their worlds been arranged differently. There is a small, awkward silence, the uneasy space that opens when two people step out of the boxes the public has put them in. "Bernard?" she asks, and her voice does not carry a prepared script. It is unadorned. It has, for the first time since the storm, the weight of someone who has decided to be honest. He measures her for a long beat, the way people who have been burned learn to measure offers. "You're Alexandra Ashcroft," he says. There is no bitterness in it, only the small, undeniable fact of recognition. The room smells of old plaster and the quiet dust of a building that carries many stories. He has one hand on Molly, one hand on a cup of coffee gone cold on the table. He is not polished, he is not performing. He is, in every unimpressive way, simply the man who kept breath in a body. She steps across the threshold, like a guest into a life she has not seen. The hallway light is dim. The storm's effects still ripple through the city's skin. She looks at the furniture, the religion of thrift and care, the small art on the mantel, a crayon skyline, ladders for climbing. She thinks of how her own life's logos and billboards are like opulent frames around a narrative she can no longer stomach as a lone, intact thing. Bernard looks at her, waiting for the motion that will decide whether this meeting will be transactional or human. Somewhere in the background, Molly hums a line from a story they read. The sound is small and real, and carries the promise that life continues in a way the internet never quite predicts. "Can I come in?" Alexandra asks, finally. He steps aside. The doorway is a narrow, ordinary thing. The rain is a soundtrack through the windows. Between them, for the first time since the storm cut the lights and the world could no longer see clearly, there is a possibility that the truth might be told in full, not in the sterile stillness of a freeze frame. They close the door against the rain. They close the door against the rain, and a thin line of warm light spills into the entryway like an offering. For a moment, both of them stand in that narrow pool and listen. To the city, to Molly humming a small song from the living room, to the rain turning gutters into slow drums. The sound of a storm is a kind of erasure.
It makes everything closer at hand and everything farther away. It makes breathing feel like an act that needs to be noticed. If you want to see how this turns out, hit subscribe. Stay with it. Alexandra moves first. She takes in the apartment with the quick, hungry glance of someone trained to read spaces the way merchants read balance sheets. Appliances, worn spots on the rug, an overfull mail pile on a stool. But something steadies her that money cannot buy. The sight of Molly with her knees tucked under her and a crayon in her hand. The little girl's face set in concentration as if the act of drawing could ordain a different world. Alexandra crouches, careful of the fragile intimacy of the moment. "Hi," she says simply, as if she is greeting someone she should have met a long time ago. Molly's eyes lift. There is a cautious recognition. The corporate campaigns on billboards have a delayed familiarity, like the echo of words you almost remember. "You're the lady from the news," she says. Alexandra smiles awkwardly, and the smile is honest and small. "I'm the lady who should have done better," she answers. The sentence lands like an offering. Bernard watches her measure them and measures her back. He has years of practice detecting the difference between a check signed out of guilt and help offered with dignity. He has learned, over the month since the storm, to treat any assist like a fragile appliance. He asks 2 questions because they are the only ones that feel reasonable. What do you want, exactly? And why now? Her answer is not a press release. It is not a carefully constructed denial. It is a sequence of actions. She tells him, "I want you to tell me what you need, and then I want to do it the right way." He hears the phrase "right way" and thinks of the way the world has taught him to expect nothing but pay and then to be grateful for it. He thinks of the email that severed his livelihood in a sentence. He thinks of the landlord's neat stamp. He thinks of Molly's small star above his head in one of her drawings. He lets the 2 possibilities sit side by side, mistrust and survival. She begins with the small practical things. She offers to bring him to a clinic, just a checkup. She offers to buy groceries that are not instant noodles. She asks to know his full name. She wants to see the way his hands move when he speaks about his daughter. He gives her the name, and a half-hour later she is on the phone arranging an appointment at a community clinic that will take him without the paperwork that usually devours the dignity out of asking. Bernard comes by with a thermos of soup and a look that is equal parts blessing and caution. She sizes Alexandra in 2 seconds and nods as if to mark the world's progress.
"You came," she says, as if that is proof enough of something. That's where a lot of folks stop. The clinic is small and smells of lemon cleaner and disinfectant, smells that once meant safety and now mean bureaucracy. The nurse moves with the steady economy of someone who has seen too many people in and out, who knows the names of syndromes made of hunger and sleep loss and stress. They weigh Bernard and take his blood pressure and check for signs that the months of precarity have carved into him. He is tired, anemia bright, in the way old refrigerators are bright when they finally die. He has lost weight, and the skin above his knuckles has fine fissures from overuse and cold. The doctor, kind, mid-50s, with the tired humor of someone who has to be gentle and efficient at once, tells them the basics. Dehydration, an iron deficiency likely links to poor diet and long hours, and a stress pattern that makes the body forget to rest. Nothing dramatic, nothing declared irreparable. For that, they are grateful. Alexandra listens like someone absorbing the grammar of a new language. She signs the paperwork without arguments. She arranges for immediate prescriptions, for a short supply of groceries delivered to the apartment, for a referral to a social worker who can navigate benefits with them. She pays for the visit in a way that is deliberate and quiet, no fanfare, no cameras. It is the kind of help the building's cleaning staff once would have accepted without comment. She keeps her eyes on Bernard because she is learning to see him, not the frame. But practicality does not resolve what the internet has rewritten. The still frame remains a wound open to infection. Tyler Brigham watches that picture as a metric the way some men watch a tide chart. He sees what he always sees, risk and mitigation. He hears his own voice telling him the spine of company policy,
preserve shareholder confidence at the cost of small things. He leans on a file, an old complaint, sealed, bureaucratic. It is not directly related, but in the machine of public perception, disjointed things can be woven together like driftwood into a narrative dragnet. He authorizes a quiet leak to a tabloid. Not violence, just the insinuation of crier complaints, the whisper that a man with this profile had other notes against him. It's not explicit wrongdoing, but it plays well on the swell of outrage. The paper runs the piece as unearthed files suggest pattern, and the underside of the story tongues the embers of the freeze frame. Alexandra is not ignorant of the shape of power. She sits in her office, this time with legal and HR across from her, and they walk through the options. The safe option is to file a brief public note, regret for the incident, no comment on personnel. The courageous option is to offer a fuller story and to stand by the truth that a man saved a woman's life. The courageous path will cost the company face. It will reopen the wound that Tyler wants stitched. It will also force real change. She chooses the courageous path in pieces. First, she makes a formal, notarized statement that explains, in plain language, the events of the night. That Bernard James Kellerman performed emergency medical intervention, that the still frame is an out-of-context image of rescue breaths, and that the company will publicly correct the record. She does this not as a PR move, but as an admission, an acknowledgement that the company had failed the people who keep it running. The statement is published with a photograph of Bernard, chosen carefully with his permission. Not a glamour shot, but a candid picture from the day he holds Molly in the laundromat with both faces laughing. Above the signature line, Alexandra writes plainly, "I was wrong. We will do better." The words land the way a small tool fits into the slot of a machine. They are exact, mechanical, human. But apologies without protection are fragile. She moves beyond the statement. She offers Bernard a job back, not as a token, not as a photo op, but as the head of a small task force to craft an employee welfare initiative with the company's backing. It is a proposal that makes some board members blanch. Reassign resources, create funds, establish emergency leave and housing support, set up a whistleblower protection system. It is not charity, it is infrastructure. It costs money, it costs time, it costs status. Bernard hears the offer and hears every caution the world has taught him. He thinks of the email that fired him, of the neat stamp of policy violation, of the months in which he learned to stretch one day's meal into two. He thinks of Janet's bluntness and Molly's ladders. He hears in Alexandra's voice not a plea, but an insistence that looks like atonement. He looks at her and asks the question he has practiced. What will keep this from happening again to someone else? She answers with a plan composed of staffers' names and accounts and a promise. I will sign a board resolution. I will back it with funds. I will make this public. I will be accountable for it. She says the word accountable like a thing she is willing to be measured by. He does not accept immediately. He is wary not of her, but of systems that do not last. He asks for time to think. He asks for small proof. A bank transfer to keep them from losing their next month's rent. A temporary room for him and Molly so they do not sleep 2 nights in someone else's spare bed. She gives the proofs without spectacle. The money appears in his account the way a tide comes in, quietly and without thunder. A letter arrives in his mailbox confirming temporary housing at a nearby community housing cooperative. A social worker named Marcus begins to coordinate care. But Tyler does not relent. If anything, his attacks sharpen as Alexandra's gestures become more public. He begins to dig further into Bernard's life and past. He finds an HR form from years ago, an old internal complaint that was never fully investigated, and feeds the document to a reporter who loves the smell of scandal. The leaker writes the narrative without context, an ambiguous incident decades past misframed as a pattern. The tabloid gives it a headline that rides the same swell as the earlier freeze frame. The public's appetite is merciless. Online threads that had once condemned Bernard now draw new curiosity. The algorithm, which delights in momentum regardless of truth, amplifies the contrivance. Friends of Bernard call him with alarm, and enemies whisper that he should be careful about stepping into the light. Alexandra sees the leak as an act of violence. She convenes a meeting that Tyler, for once, attends in person. The moment is glassy with tension. Her office, a long table, the city spread below like a ledger. Tyler sits across from her and tries to press the old logic: cut losses, preserve investor confidence. She points to the notarized statement, and to the housing proof, and to the plan for a welfare fund, and then to Bernard's face in the laundromat photograph. "You are weaponizing rumor," she says. Her voice is not shrill, it is steady, like someone whose moral clarity has become a tool. "You're exposing us to liability," Tyler answers. "There are unexamined records. We need to proceed with caution. We cannot let a single narrative threaten the company's continuity." She names the cost. Continuity without humanity is not continuity. It's a house built on sand. If we are not protecting the people whose hands keep this place running, then we are not a company. We are a machine that eats the people inside it. There is a pause where the rain's memory is a soft pressure at the windows. Tyler's eyes move, and for once there is a crack of miscalculation. He does not see people, he sees flows and margins. But he does know the board will react to scandal, and that his own position is precarious if the leaks find blame in his files. A small, personal logic takes shape in him, the same logic that once made him justify cutting an expenditure in favor of a short-term metric. He opts to escalate. Tyler speaks to a friend at a small investigative outlet who likes to dig. He suggests that the old HR note is evidence of a pattern. The outlet runs with it. The noise intensifies. Anonymous commenters, emboldened by the fragmentary truth, paint Bernard as something he is not. They weaponize the certainty that trends love: quick, loud, and discreet. For Bernard, the new wave lands like rain on old wounds. He sits in his temporary room and watches a feed that seems designed to unmake him, and worries for Molly as if his very breath has become a commodity. He thinks of the nights he taught her to breathe out fear and breathe in whatever they had. He thinks of the way his hands remembered compressions and rescue breaths, the practical muscle memory that saved a life. He wonders if the public will ever be capable of holding two truths together: that an action can be heroic and that an image can be misread. Janet holds him with a blunt tenderness. She says, "You don't need them to see you to be real." The phrase is meant to comfort, but Bernard knows that for change to be durable, visibility matters. The person who cleans a floor should not have to choose between being invisible and being punished for stepping into sight. Alexandra, meanwhile, is learning the difficulty of making restitution visible and accountable. She writes letters to the board. She reveals the leak patterns. She orders an internal audit of the source of the tabloid's files and demands transparency. She instructs legal to subpoena relevant files, not to use the subpoena as a threat, but as a fact-finding tool. The aim is not punitive, but clarifying, to show where processes failed and to propose fixes. Under legal pressure, a whistleblower in the company's security wing comes forward. They provide internal footage that shows the rescue from multiple angles: the corner camera that had never been aired, the views that show Bernard's hands, the arrival of paramedics, the flurry of executives in a panic. The footage undermines the tabloid's implication by showing, in unambiguous frames, the reality of rescue. It also shows something else: a hurried conversation in which a communications officer references potential market fallout and suggests a narrative control strategy. The whistleblower's courage cracks the smear's momentum. Tyler's role in the quiet leak becomes traceable as records show his requests and memo chains. The board is forced to act. They commission an independent review. Tyler is put on leave pending investigation. The tabloid, confronted with material showing that their pattern was a misreading of context, issues a reluctant correction. In the tumult of these institutional reckonings, there is a quieter, more human work to be done. Bernard goes to the hospital for further checkups and for a short course of iron supplements. The doctor tells him plainly that his body is repairable, but that the stress of public humiliation can have long-term effects on sleep and digestion and on how one trusts the world. You need rest, the doctor says. You need safety. Safety is not a phrase he hears often. He has sheltered others. He has fixed a heater in a house where a child slept with a blanket thin as an apology. He has been the person who made ordinary lives continue. The idea that someone might actually hold a space for his own recovery is disorienting. Alexandra holds that space in the way she knows how. She arranges for a short-term, fully furnished apartment not far from the community where Bernard has roots. She asks carefully and with permission that Molly be given access to a local after-school program where her drawings can be valued and where she can meet other children who know how to make ladders out of crayons.
She funds counseling for Bernard because she understands that gratitude without healing is brittle. The public sees some of this. She posts the notarized statement, the company issues a corrected statement, and she is photographed making a small, awkward public apology. But she insists on more than optics. She makes sure the Employee Welfare Initiative has teeth, a revolving emergency relief fund, paid emergency leave, clear procedures for reporting misconduct without fear of retaliation, and a board-level committee to oversee the initiative with community representation. Bernard, who has never wanted fame, is wary of being the figurehead for an idea. He has learned that his life can be summed up in a headline, and that headlines often lie. But he also knows that the program could make a difference for people who, like him, have to do the invisible work that keeps the city's lights on. He agrees to take on an advisory role, to listen and to report on the needs of temp workers and janitorial staff, to design a system that is practical and humane. The weeks that follow are slow work. There are meetings and long, boring legal briefs whose jargon feels like a foreign language. There are small victories. A worker in maintenance is granted emergency leave without penalty after an accident. A housing voucher is extended to a mother whose furnace failed in the winter. There are disappointments. Not enough funding, delays in approval, bureaucrats who move with glacial ease. The initiative is not perfect. It is, however, a beginning. It is the kind of thing that requires constant tending. Tyler's fall is not theatrical. He is not hauled out in chains. He is confronted with documents and with the board's own standard for governance. An internal review finds that his decisions and the absence of sufficient oversight created conditions in which rumor could be weaponized. The board, facing a potential legal exposure and a moral reckoning, votes to remove him from his CFO position pending the outcome of a formal inquiry. The word accountability moves from a theoretical argument to a procedural process. Several middle managers face consequences for the culture that allowed leaks and inattention. Tyler leaves the glass office with a box of his things. There is a small human sound to the moment. No triumphant music, no vindictive cheer, just the rustle of packing paper and the city continuing on. He is subject to review, and reviews are not the same as redemption. He will have to reckon with what his choices cost. The story does not end in a single moral victory. It ends in a reconfiguration of responsibility. The media's appetite, ever fickle, begins to shift. The freeze frame that once defined Bernard becomes, in other coverage, the image of a man who saved a life and who subsequently helped build a modest but real program for coworkers. You can see the way the narrative softens in human interest pieces that focus on Molly's drawings and on the laundromat photograph. The internet does what it always does. It moves on. But the small systems of care that were established make life easier for someone who had been living on the edge. There is a moment, months after the original storm, when Bernard is asked to speak at a small conference on workplace dignity organized by the initiative. He is not a polished speaker. He is not a person who inhabits stages.
He is a man who knows floors and compressors and the way breath can bring someone back. He stands on a low platform before an audience of HR directors, union organizers, community leaders, and a handful of journalists. He begins slowly, with those small, steady breaths the narrative has taught him, in and out, like someone counting seconds between compressions. He thinks of the night in the boardroom when he had to act without witnesses who understood what he was doing. He thinks of Molly coloring ladders. He thinks of the times he taught her to steady and be steady. "I did what I had to do," he says simply. "I didn't think I'd be famous for it. I didn't think I'd lose my job either." He laughs, a low sound that lands with a humility that is not performative. "Mostly, I thought of my daughter, and the way you breathe when you're scared. You take a breath in so you can give one out." The room listens. Some people cry. Some people nod. Others look at the slides that show numbers. How many employees had no emergency leave in the company a year before? How many were at risk of eviction? How many had no access to basic medical care? The statistics are brutal. The human voices are clearer. He lays out the initiative's modest plan. An emergency fund available within 24 hours. Partnerships with housing cooperatives, CPR and first aid training for staff across the company so that life-saving interventions are not the rare domain of single heroes. He insists on transparency, quarterly reports with independent audit committees. He asks that the program be adopted as a template beyond Ashcroft Tower, pushed into networks where other companies can learn to care in the same way. After his talk, Alexandra joins him on the stage. She is quieter than she was in the early months, the polished rage of corporate quiet replaced by the weathered patience of someone who has confronted her own limits. She thanks him publicly for his courage and for his work. She steps aside and refuses a ribbon-cutting pose. Instead, she kneels by the program's administrative table and signs the documents that make the fund real. The applause is not universe-shaking. It is, however, sincere. The story has shifted not because of a viral video, but because of slow, unglamorous work borne out in checks, in housing contracts, and in protocol changes. It is a different kind of spotlight, one that warms instead of burns. Back in the neighborhood, life begins to settle in ways both ordinary and significant. Bernard moves into the temporary apartment with Molly and salvages furniture donated by neighbors and company volunteers. They set up a kitchen table where Molly arranges her crayons by color and draws ladders with care. Janet visits often, bringing not just soup but jokes, gossip, and the kind of private history that binds neighborhoods together. There are days when Bernard sweeps the storefront sidewalk for a neighbor as he always did, and days when he walks past an Ashcroft Tower ad and no longer feels that the glass is a barrier meant to hide him. The legal inquiries into Tyler's actions proceed slowly. They are not bloodless, but they are thorough. Several managers accept responsibility for having contributed to a culture where rumor could be weaponized. The board institutes new policies about internal leaks and channels for anonymous reporting that are meant to protect workers without becoming instruments of fear. Tyler moves on, publicly and privately. He is not humiliated in spectacle. He is faced with consequences that are real: the loss of a prestigious role, reputational damage, career recalibration. He becomes, in some articles, a cautionary tale about the costs of treating human lives as ledger entries. The media cycle, which once fetishized the freeze frame, begins to follow the story of policy change and quiet repair. Molly's arc is small and bright and utterly human. At first, she resists the spotlight with the protective instincts of any child who has had to learn to carry a grown person's worries. She is proud of her father, but frightened by the noise. Over time, she finds her pride in other things: the way a teacher compliments her drawing, the way a neighbor hands her a ribbon for a school play, the way she sees her father listened to by strangers who nod and take notes. She begins to believe the image her crayon hand made: ladders that lead to windows. One evening, after a long day of meetings and a community rollout of the initiative's emergency fund, Bernard and Molly stand on the small balcony of their new apartment. The city stretches before them, a mesh of lights that no longer look entirely hostile. There is a hush, the after-storm hush, where the air smells of wet concrete and something cleaner, new pavement maybe, or the hope that something steady has been built. Bernard holds Molly by the shoulders. She is smaller than a headline, she is more durable. He tells her a little about the night in the boardroom, in a version suitable for her age. The lights went out, and he helped until the grown-ups knew how to be calm. She listens and then looks up at him the way a child looks at the horizon and believes it will hold. "You were brave," she says. He smiles. Bravery, he knows, is not a tidy thing.
Sometimes, bravery looks like repetition, showing up to a job that pays little and washes a lot, doing the same small kindnesses until they change the shape of someone's day. Sometimes, bravery looks like staying. In those months, the initiative begins to publish quarterly reports. It is not a blockbuster. The numbers are modest, but they matter. 100 emergency grants in the first year, dozens of workers trained in first aid, 3 partnerships with local housing cooperatives that prevented immediate evictions. The company's HR department is restructured to include community representatives on matters of worker welfare. The board appoints an independent oversight committee. Policies that once existed only in lip service are given processes, budgets, and accountable names. Bernard's role is not glamorous. He spends time at the maintenance office, talking to workers, listening to stories, learning the logistics of benefits. He sits in long meetings, translating lived experience into forms and programs. He goes back into the building sometimes, not as a scapegoat, but as someone invited into conversation, an advisor. The work is slow and often frustrating. There are legal hoops and finance teams that speak a language he has to learn. But there is also an unexpected thing that happens in small hallways and break rooms: gratitude. People walk up to him, young custodians, temp workers, security guards, and tell him small truths. "Because of the fund, my mother didn't lose her bed. We were trained and we saved a life. No one made us feel like a risk." These are not dramatic confessions. They are the quiet notes that change culture. Alexandra does not disappear into philanthropy as if it were a balm for guilt. She continues to sign checks and to attend hearings and to stand in uncomfortable meetings. She takes responsibility, publicly, humbly, and with a stubborn tenacity. She meets with community leaders and with the janitorial staff in person, again and again, until the initial relief hardens into habitual accountability. She is not asking to be absolved. She is asking to be judged by the work she does from then on. The city, which lives on cycles of weather and rumor and small laws, takes notice. There are think pieces, yes, some skeptical, some optimistic. The narrative, once poisoned by a freeze frame, becomes a lesson taught in business schools: how optics can harm and how corporate structures can be reshaped to protect the vulnerable. The legal process regarding the smear runs its course. Tyler's actions are documented, the leak is traced, some managers are sanctioned. There is no theatrical retribution, only consequences: job changes, fines, mandatory training, meant to restore a degree of institutional integrity. No single action erases the months of harm, but the process sends a signal. The system, however imperfect, no longer celebrates secrecy as a tool. They compare notes on the initiative's next steps. Then, almost without announcing it, they both look out at the skyline, where the Ashcroft Tower gleams among other buildings. Glass, not an instrument of separation, but a reflection in which multiple faces can appear. Life, for them, is not restored to what it was. That would be a lie. It is instead redirected, repaired in patches, given the scaffolding of policies and funds and watchful committees. The furious, viral rush of public attention has receded into a steady, workmanlike rhythm. Meetings, audits, counseling sessions, small ceremonial signings of documents that make money into protection.
On another evening, months from the first blackout, Bernard comes home and finds Molly waiting with crayons arranged like a rainbow. She hands him a drawing. Two figures on a balcony, a tower behind them, a ladder between. "For you," she says. He holds it for a long time. The picture is simple. It is also everything. He folds it gently and puts it on the kitchen table, where the light falls on it like a promise. He has a new role now, not glamorous, not permanent in the way kingships are, but sustainable enough to matter. He spends mornings at a desk learning the language of grants and compliance, afternoons visiting work sites to talk with people who clean floors, fix pipes, and make the lights come on. He listens to them with the humility of someone who knows the cost of being unseen. On the balcony of their small apartment, he and Molly look out at a city that has weathered storms and is learning to shore against them. The night sky gleams with the residue of lights that once disappeared. They talk about small things, the way a storm feels on your neck, the taste of soup Janet makes, the sound of a crowd applauding, and then about the larger things, safety, fairness, and the ways institutions can be held to account. Bernard thinks of the rescue breath that started all of this, a mechanical, life-saving gesture, and how the world had misread it until truth and structure forced it back into place. He thinks of the ways a single act can cascade into ruin or repair. He thinks of the responsibility that comes with power and the stubbornness required to turn apology into policy. Alexandra, who had once been shielded by glass and carefully staged narratives, now carries the quiet responsibility of someone who has learned that money is not atonement unless it is accompanied by systems, oversight, and the willingness to be measured. She continues to insist that her company's influence be used to create protective structures, not to polish reputations. She publicly funds educational programs and quietly meets with workers to hear about the nitty-gritty pain points that spreadsheets miss. The final public scene is not a parade. It is a small gathering at a community center where the initiative announces a partnership with other companies to pilot the emergency response fund across multiple industries. It is practical, almost bureaucratic, and yet it carries a human warmth because it promises immediate protection for people who are vulnerable between paychecks. Bernard stands aside as Alexandra speaks from a microphone. She does not take the center of attention. Instead, she hands the microphone to him and gestures for him to tell the story of the man who saved a life and helped build a ladder for others. He tells it with the same simple honesty he used at the earlier conference. "I didn't want recognition," he says. "I wanted safety." The room hears him, and hears too, a model for how corporate power can be redirected without theatrics and with the patience of bureaucratic mechanics. Afterward, there is a quiet moment outside the community center. Bernard and Alexandra talk like two people who have been through a storm and now know how to read the weather. They exchange no grand promises. They exchange ledger pages and contact lists and names of people who should be hired for the initiative so it doesn't become the thing that lives only in boardrooms. Tyler's legal review concludes with a mixture of outcomes, some sanctions, some reassignments. The company's culture has been punctured and, because of that, has room to be mended. The people who bore the brunt of the smear slowly receive apology letters and, in some cases, compensation. The company remains a company, with the complexity that implies, profits to be managed, investors to be appeased, but now with a thread of accountability woven into its operations. In the end, the change is not absolute. There are still people who will be harmed by systems. There will be other storms. But what has shifted is the default, slightly, steadily, toward protection and recognition of dignity. The last image sits quietly, Bernard and Molly on their balcony again, leaning into each other while the city's lights unfold below like a field of tiny, patient flames. He breathes in, he breathes out. He thinks of that first storm night and how different the arc of his life might have been if courage had been framed as something to punish rather than to protect. He looks at his daughter and at the ladder drawings and feels something like peace. Not the naive finality of a movie ending, but the steadier peace of a job that needs to be done and will be done, a little more fairly than it was before. Somewhere down the block, Janet hangs laundry and hums. The city continues, which is both a mercy and a task. The initiative still needs funds, volunteers, and vigilance. The ladder is not yet complete. People are still climbing, but there are more hands on the rungs now. If this story moved you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who cares about workplace fairness. If you want to help beyond that, look up local resources on employee rights and emergency relief programs. Small acts, like ladders, help others reach light.